Welcome back, everyone, to our first set of panel sessions for the conference. We have 3 sessions for ourselves this afternoon. The first one being presented by Charles, who doesn't really need any introduction because he was introduced in the panel discussion we had just now. So Charles, you have 40 minutes to give your talk and take some Q&A. So 30 minutes for talk, 10 minutes for Q&A. And once again, people, please put your Q&A into the Q&A section where we can easily then provide Charles with questioning after his talk. Otherwise, Charles, please take it away.
Before I get down to serious business, I just thought I'd amuse the company with an example of conspiracy theory used simply as a pejorative, right? So there is a guy called Christopher Key. Christopher Key is an American anti-vaxxer and snake oil salesman who is suggesting that you can avoid COVID by drinking your own urine, right? And he was made fun of by Jimmy Kimmel on Jimmy Kimmel Live, who said, "That's a conspiracy theory I could really get into. By the way, if his kids are opening a lemonade stand, I think you should stay away." Okay, all very funny. And of course, this guy's a raving nutter. But why call that a conspiracy theory? It says, look, you can protect yourself from COVID by drinking your own urine. There's no conspiracy in that at all. I want to suggest there is a way which makes it not like totally stupid to call it conspiracy theory, but still fairly stupid. It's what I call an auxiliary hypothesis conspiracy theory. So suppose you think that you can protect yourself against COVID by drinking your own urine, right? Or at least you claim that you think this. No conspiracy is involved in that hypothesis, right? No conspiracy at all. It's just about a medical treatment for avoiding a particular disease. Well, here's a way that you might make Jimmy Kimmel's joke just not totally silly, right? You might say, well, look, this is a theory which faces counter-evidence. The counter-evidence is, if you can protect yourself against COVID by drinking your own urine, why is there this huge industry of people selling other cures, vaccines, hospital treatments, all the rest of it? If urine drinking would solve your problem, why surely so many people wouldn't be saying otherwise? And then you devise a conspiracy theory as an auxiliary hypothesis to rescue your theory from refutation. So the theory itself isn't a conspiracy theory, but in order to defend itself against potential refutation, you have to invent an auxiliary hypothesis, which is a conspiracy theory. So I just wanted to mention that at the beginning because it's something that occurred to me very recently, and I thought it might be of interest to the assembled throng. But I'm not going to talk about that very much. I'm going to launch into my paper. And for those, some of you may have heard me give this one before, it used to feature extended rude remarks about Wittgenstein and his acolytes. These have been cut for the sake of brevity. Okay, so what's the title of the paper? Conspiracy Theory is a Tonkish Term, the Runabout Inference from Truth to Falsehood. Now, you know what I hate? Philosophical papers which relate some matter of great political pith and moment to some arcane issue which is only of interest or only understandable by professional philosophers. People often write this kind of paper, often under the grotesque delusion that thereby they're doing their duty as public intellectuals. I'm sorry to say that this paper is like that. I will be drawing on Pryor's famous paper, The Runabout Inference-Ticket, plus some of Dummett's remarks in Frege, The Philosophy of Language, to argue that conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorists are Tonkish terms, and I use this to clarify the debate about conspiracy theories. Maybe I might say a little bit about inferentialism and the philosophy of logic, but maybe that's we can forget about that really. It's not so important. And I should say, this paper is even going to be worse than you might think, because it's not just that I'm going to relate conspiracy theories and their believability to some arcane issue that only philosophers care about or can understand. I'm going to relate conspiracy theories to an ultra arcane set of issues which only a minority of philosophers either care about or can understand. So obviously, if I'm going to retain some shreds of respectability as a public intellectual, I'll have to explain some of the arcane terminology, terminology that is not only unfamiliar to non-philosophers, but also unfamiliar to those philosophers with no particular interest in philosophical logic. So let's start with the term inferentialism. What's that? Well, it has many varieties and it has evolved over time, but for present purposes, we can sum up the 1950s version as follows. The idea is that the meanings of logical connectives such as and, or, not, and if then are not to be given by truth conditions, but are wholly to be understood in terms of the inferences they license, and in particular by their introduction and elimination rules. Introduction rules tell you when it's okay, given a preceding set of sentences which function as premises, to introduce a new sentence containing the expression in question, which is here a conclusion. Elimination rules tell you when it's okay, given a sentence or set of sentences containing the relevant expression, a premise, to move to a new sentence or set of sentences from which that expression has been eliminated, a conclusion. So the meaning of and is supposed to be wholly given by the following introduction and elimination rules. And introduction: from a premise A and a premise B, infer, that is your license to infer A and B. Elimination rule, sorry. From a premise A and B, infer A, and infer, that's your license to infer B. So you can go from A and you can go from B to A and B, and you can go from A and B to A, and you can go to B. That's the idea. And the idea is that this totally gives you, that's all you need to know to understand the word and. And here we have the same one for the word or. From a premise A, infer, that's your license to infer A or B. Or from a premise B, that's infer, your license to infer A or B, right? So you can get A or B from either A or B, right? And that's the introduction rule. The elimination rule is if you've got A or B and you've got another premise which says not A, then you're licensed to infer B. Or from a premise A or B and a premise not B, you're licensed to infer A. And the idea was that that's all you need to know, right? That's nothing else you need to know to understand and to understand or. And this was popular amongst some Oxford linguistic philosophers of the 50s that still got its proponents today in various sophisticated variants. There's that Brandom is the name of some people that believes something along these lines. I had a lot of snarky stuff about how Wittgenstein believes something similar, but I've cut that out. Now, in the Runabout inference-ticket and its sequel Conjunction and Contonction Revisited, the New Zealand philosopher Arthur Pryor developed a reductio of the view that the meaning of a logical connective such as and, if then, or is determined by a set of inference licenses rather than the truth conditions of the propositions in which it appears. First, he sets up his target. If we are asked what is the meaning of the word and, at least in the purely conjunctive sense, as opposed to its colloquial use to mean and then, the answer is said to be completely given by saying, one, from any pair of statements P and Q, we can infer the statement formed by joining P to Q by and that from any conjunctive statement P and Q, we can infer P, and from P and Q, we can always infer Q. That's all you need to know. Anyone, this is prior talking, who has learnt to perform these inferences knows the meaning of and, but there is simply nothing more to know the meaning of and than being able to make these inferences. Right? So this is Prior's characterization of the view he's going to attack. In that case, says Prior, I can define the following connective tonk. And it's got an introduction rule and it's got an elimination rule. From A, you can infer, you're licensed to infer A tonk B for arbitrary B. That's kind of like or. If you've got A, you can infer A or B for arbitrary B. The elimination rule is like that for and. From A tonk B, infer, that is your license to infer B. Put these together and tonk licenses you to infer absolutely anything you like. Moral, at least Prior's moral, connectives should be defined in terms of their truth conditions and not their inferential roles, since otherwise there is no ban on the introduction of connectives that allow you to infer falsehoods from truths. Now, inferentialists have responded to this by accepting there's something wrong with tonk, but insisting that this doesn't refute inferentialism. Rather, there is a constraint on the introduction of connectives and indeed on words in general, namely that the rules governing such connectives should only license conservative or harmonious extensions of the language. That is, they should not license inferences to propositions not involving the new connectives that were not licensed before, right? So they've got a response to this, but they do see it as a big problem, right? It's not like people wave it away. No, this is a serious problem. Inferentialists need to deal with this. They do have strategies for doing so. I don't think they're very good, but you know, that's in a way beside the point. We can put it like this. If you're going to help yourself to the notions of truth and falsehood, it's hard to say, oh, well, we'll skip that. We'll skip that. It's not important. The important thing to remember is that it's agreed on all hands there's something radically wrong with Tonkish terms. One way of characterizing what's wrong with tonk is that it confers a license to infer the false from the true. And there's another point on which inferentialists and truth condition theorists agree. Tonk does not express a genuine concept or does not have a sense. Either it has no meaning at all, or it doesn't have, so to speak, a respectable meaning. Okay, now we move on to Michael Dummett. Michael Dummett wrote a big fat book on Frege, widely respected. I find it hard to believe it's actually read by many people because his style is abominably turgid. But, you know, there are some bits in it which you can, you know, little bits of gems which you can find in it, which are interesting. Having written this big fat book about Frege, Dummett prefaced it with a dissertation on his adventures as a campaigner against racism in Britain in the 60s and 70s, which is not what one would expect to preface a vast tome on a philosopher of logic and language who was in fact deeply racist and chauvinist. But, you know, never mind. Dummett is interested in the use of racist slurs. His example is Bosch. I think he's using this because it's kind of comical. People by the 1960s and 70s weren't using the term Bosch seriously. So it's not as offensive as the ones which were his real targets. Anyway, Bosch introduction. From X is of German nationality, infer X is Bosch. Bosch elimination. From X is Bosch, infer X is barbarous and more prone to cruelty than other Europeans, right? So embodies, so to speak, a racist stereotype. But Dummett's point is that racist slurs are like this. There's in effect, an introduction rule and an elimination rule, which allows you to infer falsehoods from truths. And they are widely used as inference licenses in a way that's, not conservative, such that inference is derogatory to some group or groups. They lead from truths to falsehoods. And of course, my claim is that conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist are Tonkish terms. Okay. But what complicates the issue is that they're characterized not by one, but by a number of different and conflicting Tonkish rules, all of which can be used to take people from the true to the false. Hence, they do not have respectable senses, as defined either by truth conditions theorists or inferentialists. Two, they do not have, they do not have determinate, uncontested extensions. Hence, conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist do not constitute a set of phenomena suitable for psychological or social scientific investigation. Okay, I'm just going to go through a set of rules, and I think what you will see once you've got the concept of introduction and elimination rules, that you will know of uses which correspond to the use of these different rules. So Tonkish rules 1, conspiracy theory introduction. From this is a theory which posits a conspiracy, infer, that is, it is okay to infer this is a conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory elimination. From this is a conspiracy theory, infer, that it's okay to infer this theory is false, crazy, or unbelievable. Well, leads us from truths to falsehoods, since many theories which posit a conspiracy theory are true, plausible, or such that it's rational to believe them. Also, it isn't conservative in the sense that inferentialists are interested in. Tonkish rules 2, conspiracy theorist introduction. From this person believes a theory which posits conspiracy, infer this person is a conspiracy theorist. Elimination rule. From this person is a conspiracy theorist, infer, that is, it's okay to infer this person is crazy, silly, or irrational. Leads from truths to numerous falsehoods. Every politically literate person subscribes to some theories which posit a conspiracy, and not all of them are crazy, silly, or irrational. Here's another one. From this is a theory which posits a conspiracy to which I, or the epistemic authorities which I respect, do not subscribe, infer this is a conspiracy theory. So this kind of use might allow that some theories which posit a conspiracy are not conspiracy theories, but that's because the person who is using the term believes in them. Conspiracy theorist elimination. From this is a conspiracy theory, infer this theory is false, crazy, or unbelievable. Again, licenses us to move from truths to falsehoods, since many theories which posit a conspiracy and are disbelieved by some speaker or their epistemic authorities are plausible or rationally believable. It's also non-conservative. More importantly, however, it's indexical. The introduction rule is indexical. It involves I or we, whilst the elimination rule purports not to be. So it licenses people to move from indexical truths to general claims which stand a good chance of being false. Tonkish rules 4. From this person subscribes to a theory which posits a conspiracy to which I, or the epistemic authorities I respect, do not subscribe, infer this person is a conspiracy theorist. And again, the elimination rule leads to the conclusion that the person is crazy. Right? And again, obviously, it could lead from truths to falsehoods, indexical truths to general falsehoods. Perhaps this one is more interesting. I think there is conspiracy negation as well as conspiracy negation elimination. From this is a theory which posits conspiracy to which I, or the epistemic authorities I respect, do subscribe, infer, that is, it's okay to infer this is not a conspiracy theory. So if I believe it, it's not a conspiracy theory. From conspiracy theory negation and elimination, from this is a conspiracy theory, infer, that is, it's okay to infer it's false, crazy, or unbelievable. And we have, oh gosh, something bad's happened here. I'm going to have to, that's unfortunate. How did that happen? Okay, I'm going to have to switch to another, how did that happen? Perhaps this will make a difference. I'm opening up another document, hoping to share that.
So I think you need to stop sharing your screen and then start sharing again.
I think that's what I need to do. That's
Yep.
odd. Your screen sharing, stop share. There we go. Let's find the document I was after. That's unfortunate. How did that happen?
I suggest conspiracy, but you know, that's the kind of person I am, a conspiracy theorist.
Yes. Here we go. Find a current draft. Let's make sure I've got this stuff at the bottom before I share it. Yeah, here we are. Okay. Let's close that one and save yes and share screen. Here we are. Is that visible to everybody?
It is indeed. Yep.
Okay.
We're back.
Yes. I think you've got the general idea, right, of it's not simply that there are Tonkish introduction and elimination rules for the positive use of this is of conspiracy theorists and conspiracy theory. The really interesting point is that there's a negative one as well. From this is a theory involving a conspiracy, which I or the people I respect believe, you infer this is not a conspiracy theory. And of course, that means you can then infer from the usual elimination rules, this isn't necessarily crazy, or this isn't a crazy theory. But of course, it could be a crazy theory. Again, it licenses you to move from the true to the false, and in particular from an indexical truth to a general falsehood. Okay, so what? Okay. Case in point, one that we discussed already, right? The introduction and elimination rules for conspiracy theory negation were deployed to protect two conspiracy positing theories from critical examination with catastrophic effect. So the war in Iraq was justified by three conspiracy positing theories, one true, two false, that the events of 9/11 were due to a conspiracy on the part of Al-Qaeda, who were themselves in league with the Taliban, that the regime of Saddam Hussein was in some sense in cahoots with al-Qaeda, and that that regime had successfully conspired to evade UN inspectors and had acquired or retained weapons of mass destruction, and was on the verge via the acquisition of yellow cake from Niger to gaining a nuclear capability, and thus making regime change a clear and present necessity, because the regime was a clear and present danger to both the UK and the US, right? So we've got cases where the, you could also point out that the other introduction rules were used to deal with the claim that the invasion was based on economic interests or was all about oil. That was dismissed as a conspiracy theory. Okay, so that's an example of their use. What's the upshot? Insofar as the terms conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist have an extension, it's the result of the successive applications of mutually inconsistent Tonkish rules. Thus, from a social scientific point of view, there is no there. I got that from Brian, by the way. The categories conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist are not sufficiently determinate or cohesive to be the proper objects of social scientific investigation. Upshot 2, my research shows that that conspiracy theorists think, believe, feel X or have characteristic Y is in general not a sensible thing to say, absent a clear and non-Tonkish definition of the term conspiracy theorist. How do you determine who is or is not a conspiracy theorist? Well, if conspiracy theorist is simply defined non-Tonkishly as somebody who subscribes to conspiracy positing theory, then every historically literate person is a conspiracy theorist. Thus, your generalization, if true, which it probably isn't, amounts to the following claim: my research shows that historically and politically literate people think, feel, or believe Y or have characteristic X, right? That's not going to be very interesting. If your sample is selected on the basis of common sense, that is successive applications of mutually inconsistent Tonkish rules, then your generalization runs a double risk of overstatement and understatement. Overstatement, it will be false with respect to some people who can reasonably be regarded as conspiracy theorists. Understatement, it will apply to people you have excluded from the class of conspiracy theorists, even though they can be reasonably regarded as such. So my comparison here is with bitch, right? So I tried to look at an offensive term which wasn't just like too horribly offensive. From this is a woman of whom I or the people I respect disapprove, infer, it's okay to infer this woman is a bitch. There may be a few other things we want to stick in there, but you know. Bitch elimination, from this woman is a bitch, infer, it's okay to infer this woman is deep down mean. That's roughly what bitches are supposed to be like. Licenses moves from truths to falsehoods, since many women of whom some people disapprove are not deep down mean. Again, the introduction rule is indexical, whilst the elimination rule purports not to be. So it licensed people to move from indexical truths to non-indexical claims, which stand a good chance of being false. And of course, we also have the corresponding bitch negation rule, right? This is a woman I or the people I respect, admire, which often is going to apply to, you know, individual women. People tend to admire themselves. Infer, this woman is not a bitch. From this woman is not a bitch, infer, it's prima facie false that she's deep down mean. Now, you know, it's obviously problematic, but you can probably see what's coming. What I'm going to argue is the comparison with conspiracy theories. This is a bankrupt approach in the philosophy or in social science. You know what we're going to do? We're going to find out what it is about bitches that makes them so mean. That's going to be a psychological project. Well, this is obviously stupid, right? Because there is no determinate extension, and people are called bitches more or less at random. I mean, not completely at random, but to a very considerable extent. This would not be a viable or respectable program in social, scientific, or psychological research. And it's because the term bitch doesn't really have a determinate extension. It's a pejorative. It's a Tonkish term. And in a similar way, conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist don't have determinate extensions. And one of the sort of points about this is, for many people, they use the negation introduction rule, which means, this may be a theory which posits conspiracy, but if I believe it, it's not a conspiracy theory. Yeah, and some people can, not many people are going to say of themselves that I am a bitch. And it's the same basic approach. These are not respectable terms in social scientific discourse because they don't have determinate extensions. And the reason they don't have determinate extensions is they are the products of Tonkish introduction and elimination rules. The extensions are, that is. And they are inconsistent, and they move from indexal to general claims. And what is to be done? Well, I've already given my suggestions what is to be done. We just drop the pejorative connotation. We develop a serious approach to finding out what distinguishes between those conspiracy theories which are reasonably plausible, worth investigating, and those which can be dismissed pretty much out of hand. Once we've done that, and I think there's still a lot of work to be done, then we can say, well, what about those bad conspiracy theorists then? Why are they like that? Why do they believe these theories? What, of course, complicates the matter slightly is you can believe a perfectly sane conspiracy theory for silly reasons. So, somebody who believes in the Watergate conspiracy because Richard Nixon looks like a crook. Well, Richard Nixon did look like a crook. He was, in fact, a crook. But just because he looked like a crook, it didn't mean he was a crook. And it certainly didn't mean that you had to believe the whole Watergate conspiracy. But so, that complicates matters. But we won't have anything at all respectable until we have a set of determinate criteria for distinguishing between good and bad conspiracy theories. And that is not a psychological question to be investigated. It's something in, as it were, well-informed economic, political, and philosophical theory. That's how we investigate what the difference between good and bad conspiracy theories. And it's got to be deeply, deeply informed by historical investigations, and not by, the latest thing you happen to have seen on Facebook. That's, I think, it. And now I should be open to questions. Are you going to be the question master?
I am indeed. I am indeed. In fact, we will go straight to the question that Jonathan asked in the last panel, because I think it actually is salient to the discussion you've had here. Charles suggested that we should use a new neutral term for theories positing conspiracies lacking its pejorative connotations. Why should we expect this to work? Wouldn't the social forces that have attached skeptical ideas to conspiracy theory be likely to attach the same ideas to the new term too? Compare the slur treadmill generally.
There's the slur treadmill, I agree. Well, let me first say, well, there's an interesting thing about the social forces here. Let me compare a case where I think this is the right thing. To say, introduction of new terms doesn't make any difference. And it's with the history of terms for what you might think of as prisons for young offenders in the UK. Now, prisons for young offenders, or semi-prisons for young offenders, were called when I was really young, Borstals, named after Dr. Borstal, who sort of set them up. And then after a while, they started to get a bad rep, because you couldn't say I've been to a Borstal, because that meant, you know, I've been to a prison for young offenders, which means I'm basically a young crim. And so, you know, it got a bad rep. So they changed the name to something they thought would be nicer: approved schools. They were basically the same thing as Borstals, but they had a nicer name. You know, it's a school, people approve of it. You know, I've been to an approved school. That sounds good. Until you realize that what it really means, I've been to a prison for young offenders. So, you know, it's just as bad. And approved schools started to have bad connotations. Then at a later stage, they moved it to the more ridiculous community homes with education. And again, it's basically the same thing. I mean, it might be improved a bit, but it's a prison school for young offenders. And so that starts to have pejorative connotations too. Right? So if there is a thing to which people might reasonably object or have, bad associations with, simply changing the name isn't going to improve things in the long term. It might, temporarily improve things until people find out what approved schools or community homes with education really are. So, that's not sensible. But actually, I wasn't suggesting that we change the terminology. I was suggesting we purify the terminology. I was suggesting we try and remove the pejorative connotations from conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorists, and just say, look, we're defining this as a theory which posits a conspiracy, or a person who believes in a theory which posits a conspiracy. That's it. And they could be good, they could be bad, whatever. And then we then try and develop a theory distinguishing the good ones from the bad ones. Now, but answering the question, I don't think it's just social forces. I think, and there's some evidence for this, that there was a deliberate attempt to infect the term conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist with negative connotations. And there was actually pretty much a conspiracy to do this. This was a deliberate line pushed by, I think, the FBI and maybe the CIA in the 60s to deal with Kennedy's assassination. Licensed, of course, by the fact that you have a famous philosopher who seems to be saying things which support the idea that there's something wrong with conspiracy theories as such. But the ball is now rolling. Whether we can actually stop it rolling or not, I have no idea. I don't think simply changing the terminology would do any good, partly because it would be just confusing. I think it's particularly confusing to be like Kasim Kassam. I think you can solve every problem by sticking capital letters on things. That's just terrible. I think that a sustained period of propaganda, insisting time and again, but people often conspire. So if this is conspiracy theory, doesn't mean it's bad. It may be bad, of course. Sometimes people suggest that, I don't think many conspiracy theories are crazy. Of course, many of them are, as I've always said. The point is that they're crazy because they're crazy. They're not crazy because they're conspiracy theories. Now, you've got another question about Dummett here. What's this?
Yeah, so we've got time for one more question, which is Dummett's idea about harmony and conservatism requires that the inferences be deductively valid. On that model, your Tonkish rule's one elimination rule implies it should be contradictory to say this is a conspiracy theory, but there's actually really good reason to believe it. But that doesn't sound like a contradiction. Is that a worry? I agree that there's a kind of intuitive default reasonableness inferring from it's a conspiracy theory to don't believe it, but I also agree that this has bad effects. But it seems quite different from the meaning constitutive sentence deductive rules posited for and or tonk.
My answer is I don't think it's reasonable. I think the default reasoning is not reasonable. That's the whole point. The question has disappeared.
Oh, it'll be in the answered section now.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So sorry. I don't think the default thing is reasonable. That's the whole point. It's not reasonable. It's dangerous. It's not reasonable, and it's politically dangerous. So, well, the whole point about Tonkish is it's not deductively valid, right? That Tonkish terms are not deductively valid. They allow you to go from the true to the false, which means that they can go from the possibly true to the possibly false. So they're not deductively valid, I mean, if we get into the issue of inferentialism, there the question is, can the inferentialist explain what's wrong with Tonk without adverting to the concepts of truth and falsity? Because once you've got them, you might as well use them. I would have thought that though Dummett himself doesn't like truth, he does like warranted assertability, and that's his stand-in for truth. But of course, there are a lot of complications to do with the sort of arcane aspects of Dummett's philosophy, which we don't need to get into. What I liked was his simple account of how Bosch is a Tonkish term, how racial slurs are Tonkish terms. And my simple point was, well, this applies also to conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist. So what I need to get across to Jonathan, no, my approach is, no, we use the term conspiracy theory and we eliminate the pejorative connotation.